Every thought you repeat and every feeling you rehearse is wiring your brain. And eventually, that wiring becomes the filter through which you experience life. But long before you've made those decisions, something else is already shaping the outcome. You see, your brain has been rehearsing it, not just through your thoughts, but also through your feelings. And if you understand how that wiring happens, you can begin to change it. So let me start with something really simple. Your brain is constantly wiring itself. So when people say neurons that fire together, wire together, it sounds like a motivational quote, but it's actually describing a physical process. See, a neuron looks like a tree. There's a trunk, there's branches, and then smaller branches. And now imagine thousands of these trees standing close together. So when signals travel through those branches, they repeatedly jump to the neighboring branch, and that connection strengthens. It happens more and more, and it's easier for that signal to go across that path again. So your brain becomes very efficient with these signals, right, that jump from place to place or from idea to idea. But here's the part that most people miss. It's not just your thoughts that create this wiring. It's your thoughts combined with your emotional charge. Thoughts plus feelings is what strengthens the pathways. Now, once that pathway becomes strong enough, it becomes a filter. It becomes a way of perceiving life. Okay, so let's talk about something that's really neutral, like math. Maybe at some point you made mistakes in math. You thought, "Oh, that was stupid." Then it happened again, and then it's I'm not good at math. And then maybe culture reinforced it. You're either a math person or you're not. So now you have the external and internal messaging. But here's what happens when the wiring happens. Uh, the emotion. So when you get those two together, and I want to just say that again, you have the internal and you have the external, and the external being culture. It's so funny. I'm looking up at this camera, but you have the external and you have the internal. So you have what culture tells you, and then you have what you're saying about yourself, about that message. But here's where the wiring really begins to happen. Emotions enter the system. So, there's embarrassment, frustration, or shame. Emotions is like the electrical current that's running through those branches. It strengthens the connection. Now you replay the experience in your mind over and over, and you imagine making that mistake again and again, and you feel the same frustration again, and the brain begins to rehearse the pattern. Your brain doesn't really strongly distinguish between what is real and what is vividly being imagined. Okay, and this is actually what athletes do. Athletes will sit, or high performing people will sit in kind of meditative states or quiet states and imagine that rehearsal, imagine that performance over and over again. And the mind, the brain, doesn't know if it's real, if you're actually doing it or not. And so something physically begins to happen as a result of this. So the wiring continues. Eventually, your behavior changes. You hesitate, right? You opt out. No, I'm not really good at that. You stop trying altogether because why would you bother? You're not good at it. And somewhere along the line, the statement changes. You stop saying, "Oh, I made a mistake." And you start saying, I'm not good at math. Now it feels like the truth. But what actually happened was that repetition built a filter. Mhm. And now your brain scans for evidence that confirms that filter. Okay. Now, one of the ways that I explain this visually is about the idea of a tree branch. And at first, the branches barely touch, but the more signals that travel across them, the more reinforced that connection is becomes, right? You want to think of, right, those branches. And if you imagine throwing strands of toilet paper, so if you go into you go into this tree forest area and now you're toilet papering it and you're throwing strands of TP over those branches, eventually the entire tree becomes tangled in this tissue, and it becomes layer after layer, and thought after thought, emotion after emotion. Now you've got this dense web that's connecting everything, right? So you went from the branches and now you have this thick layer. That's what repeated um that's what repeated thoughts and feelings starts to look like in the brain. Okay, but here's the key. You're not just thinking that, it builds it. So feeling builds it. So even if you're not thinking it, feeling builds it. Your emotional state strengthens the wiring. And that's why understanding your emotional patterns matters so much. Now, it's not just what you think about yourself, but it's how you default emotionally when life happens. I want to show you a visual for the first time. I'm going to roll over here. All right. So if you start thinking about those branches and how they come together, I want to give you a sense of how it happens in the brain, because I'm a visual learner. And for my visual learners out there, just getting a little costume in play. All right, so here we have the visual. Okay, so remember in the beginning, I said if you understood how wiring happens, you can change it. So going back to that math, that neutral math example. So let's say you had this belief, you had this sort of like, oh, yeah, I made a mistake. So here's the first thing. You made a mistake, right? So you start making a mistake in math, and then you start saying, yeah, I'm not good at math. And then, boom, when you reinforce it, it becomes a solid filter. It's no longer blinking, it's no longer consideration. So everything that comes to you, your brain is like, okay, not good at this. Boom. Once you know that this is how it works, and you also want to consider how long you've been saying it as well. And now, when you want a different experience, and you go, I am pretty good at math. I do have basic understanding of it. And now I'm talking about some kind of advanced. I'm now talking about advanced math. Sometimes it becomes this cultural belief that, at least in my generation, women aren't good with budgets, right? Not the truth, right? So you go, you know what? I could balance a checkbook. I could challenge, I can balance, and I can, pay attention to my budget and manage my budget. And now what starts to happen is this becomes a new pathway. And you might have that old one back there, but the more that this becomes solid, now this one becomes a doubt until it is shut off. Now you can rewire this old pattern so that now you're like, not only are you good, this is talking to you about math, and now this one is going into something deeper about math. And now you have these firing and wiring together. Now, another possibility is you can end that pattern altogether. You really can. It's like hanging out in a depressed neighborhood. You can move. Yeah. So I hope this visual really helped you get a sense of what firing and wiring together actually creates. All right. Ciao. All right. Let's bring this back to everyday life. Your brain is always practicing something. Every thought you repeat. Every thought you repeat. Every emotional rehearsal you run in your mind, you know, the ones where you think about how you would do something differently. Every story you tell yourself about yourself, those are signals moving across branches, strengthening pathways. And over time, those pathways become the filter through which you experience life, which means your brain begins predicting what will happen next. You don't even have to think about it. You don't. Not based on reality, but based on the wiring. Yeah, that's pretty deep. You know, but it's not just based on the wiring. It's based on the wiring that it's practiced the most. That's why sometimes when you try something new or you want to shift your life and you default back to the old ways and you just think that you're broken, it's not true. You're just well practiced there. But that's why two people can experience the same situation completely differently. You know, they're not seeing the same thing, they're seeing it through different individual filters. And those filters were built through repeated thought and repeated emotional charge. Yeah. Okay. I don't just talk about why and what happened. Let's talk about some practical tools that you can use. If you want to start seeing this process in your own life, first, I do want you to observe it because you want to see your flavor of it. The process you want to start in your own life is very simple. Your first practice is notice the repeated thought, not the occasional thought. Okay. It's the one that you say over and over again. I always mess up like this. This never works out. I'm not good at that. When you hear repetition, you're looking at wiring. Okay. Second practice. Before I talk about the second practice, if you're still here, type below. I want you to comment below brain power. Type below brain power. Okay. Your second practice is notice the emotional pattern that follows the thought. Okay. Do you default to frustration or do you have anxiety? Or is there embarrassment? Your emotional response is what strengthens that neural pathway. Remember, thoughts plus feeling equals reinforcement. You ready for the third one? All right. Let me know if this is making sense. All right. Comment below if this is making sense. Because I put my little prop together. Firing new eyes. I put this prop together to make sure you can see it because I'm a visual learner. All right. And I totally understand sometimes what it means when you hear firing and wiring together. You ready for the third one? Okay, great. The third practice is interrupt the rehearsal. When you catch yourself replaying the same scenario in your mind, pause because rehearsal is practice. Remember, your brain can't tell the difference. It doesn't know that you're practicing success or you're practicing failure. It simply wires what is repeated. Okay. Now I want to talk about an element that helps us kind of get a sense of your personal flavor of emotion. This is why understanding your emotional nature matters because emotions aren't random. They follow patterns and we're born with certain patterns, just like thoughts do. And one framework that has been used for centuries to understand emotional patterns is the moon. In astrology, the moon represents how we instinctively feel and how we respond emotionally before we even think. It's like the emotional rhythm that is running underneath everything. When you start paying attention to that rhythm, you begin to see how feelings influence the wiring process. Is that cool? I'm such a nerd. Okay, now you want to remember thought alone does not build the pathway, thought plus emotion does. All right, now that you've got that, I want to let you know that if you want to explore that emotional layer, I've created a free guide for you. It's a moon PDF where I use the analogy between music and emotions. I included some well known artists through different eras and singers, along with their moon signs, so you can start noticing emotional patterns and similarities. Even if you don't know astrology, you don't know your moon sign, or if you want to understand what your moon sign is, comment below and I will respond. It's a simple way of beginning to understand your emotional rhythm. And once you see that rhythm, you start to understand how your feelings may reinforce certain neural pathways in your life. The link below is where you can get that download of that description. If your brain wires what it practiced most, the real question becomes, what are you rehearsing every day? Your thoughts, your emotions, your expectations, because over time, those become the filter through which you experience life. I will see you in the next video. I've linked another related topic that will go a little bit deeper into the emotional layer. Thank you for watching, and mwah, until next time, bye for now.